Hey everyone, my name is Tristan and welcome to my small workshop in my basement. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can make a Stormtrooper helmet out of EVA foam using pre-made templates. If you want to make it, you can get the templates on my Etsy store for pretty cheap. The link is in the description below. This build isn't too hard, so if you already made something out of EVA foam before, you should be able to make it. So if you like Star Wars, if you like Stormtroopers, then give it a try. Let's get started. The first thing you want to do is to print and tape together the templates. Next, you can use scissors or an X-Acto knife to cut out all of your template pieces. When that's done, you can cut out a notch on every registration line from each template piece. Those lines are there to help us line up our foam pieces properly when gluing them together later. Make sure you don't throw away this part of the template. You're gonna need it as a reference on how to cut your foam pieces later. Now that you're done cutting out your template pieces, this is what you should be left with. The first pieces we're gonna cut out are those two, and you'll need 10mm thick EVA foam. To pin down my template pieces to my foam, I'm using sewing pins, and then I trace around them using a Sharpie. Don't forget to also trace your registration marks. The earpiece has to be traced once, then flipped and traced again. Before cutting out your pieces, it's a good idea to separate them from your big sheet of foam. This is gonna make cutting out your pieces much easier. When you get to the top of the earpiece, you can use a smaller knife to make those round cuts cleaner and easier. Now it's time to cut out the brow strip. If you have 4mm foam, this is what you should use. But I didn't have any, so I'm just going to use a scrap of thick floor mat foam and remove half of the thickness. So I just pin down my templates to my foam, trace it out, and then cut it out. After that, I put the foam piece on its side and carefully cut off half of the thickness. The next pieces to cut out are the front vents. For those, you should use 5mm EVA foam, but I don't have any, so I just use a scrap piece of floor mat foam. As for every template piece, trace them down to your foam and then cut them out. Make sure that every piece that says cut twice gets cut twice. After every vent piece has been cut out, I remove half of their thickness using a sharp X-Acto knife. When that's done, you should have 7 vent pieces. Now it's time to cut out the rest of our pieces of 6mm EVA foam. I'm using the thin floor mat foam, which you can get in big rolls. The first step is to pin down and trace out every single template piece. Don't forget to also trace your registration marks. And as I said earlier, make sure that every piece that says cut twice gets cut twice. And of course, make sure that every left piece gets flipped before getting traced again. When you're done tracing down every template piece to your foam, you'll have to also transfer the inset details from those two pieces and the border from the nose vent. To do this, you can cut out the details from the templates and use the negative space to trace down those details to your foam. Now it's finally time to cut out our foam pieces, but before doing that, I removed the extra foam like I did earlier to make the cutting process easier. To cut your pieces out, I recommend using a small X-Acto knife, which will make cutting tight curves much easier. And of course, use your cutting reference to know what angles to cut in your foam. Cutting all of your pieces out is the longest and most tedious part of this entire build, and using a brand new blade helps a lot. When you're done cutting out your foam pieces, this is what you should end up with. The pieces you see on screen either need to be cleaned up or need to be rounded. For this job, I'm using a rotary tool. The earpieces just have to be cleaned up, mostly around the top. The visor also has to be cleaned up. Every tight corner has to be rounded properly. And the front curved side of the vents all have to be completely rounded. When you're done sanding your pieces, it's a good idea to use a heat gun to smooth them out. Finally, the prepping stage is complete. Now it's time to build the helmet. The first part to assemble is the top dome of the helmet, and you'll need the 6 pieces you see on screen. Before gluing everything together, I use my heat gun to heat up the pieces and form them to give them a curve. This will make the gluing process much easier. Here are all of the pieces heat formed. Now it's time to glue those pieces together, and for that I'm using contact cement. For this project you can't really use hot glue. There is so much tension trying to pull every seam apart that I'm not sure hot glue would be strong enough for the job. After applying contact cement to all of the pieces, I stick them together, taking my time and following the registration lines. After gluing the left side pieces together and the right side pieces together, I can combine them to finalize the dome of the helmet. At this point the dome is really lumpy, so I use my heat gun to heat it up and I form it to make it more round. Now that the dome is done, we can attach the visor to the front of it. From now on, I won't show you the step of applying the contact cement because it's pretty self-explanatory. After adding contact cement to both the visor and the dome, I stick them together, making sure that the center line of the visor is in line with the center seam of the dome. Then you can attach the back plate to the dome, making it sit on a higher level to create a 3D effect. Take your time on this part. You want to make sure it's even all the way around. When that's done, I heat up the back plate and shape it to make it a bit more square. Now it's time to create the back hump, and the first step is of course to heat form the pieces. Next, you can stick the 2 pieces as shown in the video. To give our back hump the same shape as the one on Stormtrooper helmets, start by sticking the center of each piece together, and as you go outwards, stretch the top piece, giving it an overlap of about 3/4 of an inch on each side. Now you can see how it's gonna attach to the helmet, and before gluing it down, make sure you cut off the excess foam. And now you can stick it down to the helmet, making sure to attach it on the back plate instead of under it. The next pieces to assemble are the side humps. And the first step is of course to heat form them. Make sure the 2 pieces that have a curved side are really stretched and rounded because they're gonna define the look of the sides of the helmet. Now that they are properly heat formed, I glue each 2 pieces together to create the 2 side humps. And now you can glue the 2 side humps to the rest of the helmet. Just make sure that the bottom of each side hump is in line with the bottom of the back hump. Now it's time to tackle the upper faceplate. Start by heat forming it as shown on screen. The faceplate has a very distinct shape, and forming it this way will ensure you get it right. When that's done, you can stick the upper faceplate to the visor. You need to glue the nose bridge of the faceplate on a higher level than the visor, but the 2 sides have to be on a lower level. This is gonna give you the iconic shape that the Stormtrooper helmets have. Now that the visor is connected to the faceplate, you need to cut out 2 small foam pieces to glue as backings for the 2 holes on each side of the eyes. The next step is to glue in the earpieces, but first you gotta remove the step from the backplate to the visor piece by cutting a bevel into the backplate on each side. To help the glue adhere better, I sanded the texture on the backside of each earpiece, just enough to remove the kind of glossy finish. Next, I marked where the earpieces need to bend to accommodate the hump on each side of the helmet. Then I heat formed the two pieces into the right shape. After that, I could finally stick them to the helmet. When that's done, you can stick the brow strip right over the visor piece, trying to center it as well as possible. Then you can cut up the excess so the brow strip ends where the backplate starts. Next, you can cut on this line and then glue it back together, making sure the top part is on a higher level than the bottom one. It's finally time to give some support to the whole helmet, and to do this we're gonna glue in the bottom trim. You can stretch and pull the helmet to make sure it's symmetrical on each side and to give your helmet the shape you want. Then you can cut off the excess. Now it's time to build the lower front assembly with all of the parts you see on screen. Before gluing everything together, you'll need to heat form all of the pieces. Make sure the middle piece is shaped just like you see on screen. The rest of the parts will need a simple compound curve. Now that you're done with the heat forming process, it's time to glue all of the pieces together. When you're done, you should have two vents connected by the middle piece. To make the lower front assembly look cleaner, you'll have to round up the edges of the entire thing, front and back, using a rotary tool. And then, to remove the roughness of those edges, you can heat seal them. Now you can glue them to the rest of your helmet, but first you have to remove about an inch of the side humps or else your new piece won't fit in. And to know how far to glue it in, use a Sharpie to mark the right spot on each side. When you've got your marks, you can replicate them an inch further down and cut off on this new mark. One last step before gluing in your lower front assembly is to glue in your vent backing plates inside of your vents using hot glue. And now, finally, using a bunch of hot glue, stick your lower front assembly to the rest of your helmet one side at a time. Make sure to glue both sides in all the way, making your helmet as symmetrical as it can be. At this point, the front of the helmet will look kind of lumpy, but the lower faceplate will get propped up by gluing in our next piece, the nose vent. You just gotta heat it up, shape it as shown on screen, sand up the texture where it will get glued inside of the helmet, and finally glue it in using contact cement. And it should look pretty good. Now you can use 1mm foam for the vents and glue them in using super glue. I made the details that go on the earpieces using more 1mm foam and I glued them in using super glue. It's now time to build the vent pieces. I glued them together using super glue, looking at a picture of a Stormtrooper helmet as a reference of how they go together. When they're all stuck together, I removed the excess thickness to make the back flat. The piece I'm showing you right now is supposed to be the backing plate for those vents. It ended up not fitting on my helmet, but every helmet is made a bit different, so it might fit on yours. I decided to cut myself a new piece which would fit better in my helmet. Then I glued my vents to this piece. And of course, I glued this assembly inside of the helmet using contact cement. Then I reinforced it using a lot of hot glue. And this is how it looks. Now it's time for the details. I cut out those two pieces and glued them back in at an inset. I did the same thing for the two in the front, but because they have a seam going through, I replaced them with new pieces. The bottom of the earpieces have to be beveled to make them look more rounded and less blocky. Then you can heat up your cuts to make them smoother and even push them against your work surface. To make these small vent covers, I used the caps from my contact cement tubes, but any small caps would do the job. I sanded the bottom of my caps and then glued them in my side vents using super glue. At this point, the dome of the helmet is too round and has to be flattened. For that, I start by heating it up using my heat gun. Then I flip it over and press it against my work surface. I put big heavy things inside the helmet so the dome doesn't fold inside. I wait a couple minutes and remove the objects from inside the helmet. If it's too flat for your liking, just heat it back up and work it a bit more. Now you have your own foam Stormtrooper helmet. So this is the final result. Now of course the seams aren't filled, the helmet is not primed and it's not painted, but I'm gonna show you how to do this in my next video. I'll show you how to paint it to make it look like real vacuum formed plastic, which should be really cool, so stay tuned for that. So this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, you can leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more cool stuff like this. I now have an Instagram account for this YouTube channel, and I post some pretty cool things on there, even stuff which are not in my videos. So if you want, go check it out, the link is in the description. If you want to build this helmet yourself, go purchase the templates on my Etsy store. They are pretty cheap and the result speaks for itself. So once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!